Hi, I'm Evelyn. I wasn't supposed to be there. Not in the photos. Not in the guest list. Not in the memory. According to my sister, there wasn't a single space in her perfect little wedding that could handle someone like me. Not the aisle, not the table arrangement, not the bridesmaid lineup, and definitely not her wedding hashtag. Basic, she called me. Basic like a plain notebook. Basic like unsalted popcorn. She didn't say it out of cruelty, at least not the loud, obvious kind. It came through in the careful silence, the way she designed around me, tiptoed past me like I was a pile of beige sweaters. And still, I had wrapped the engagement gift in 2 layers of rose gold tissue paper. Still, I showed up for her cake tasting when her maid of honor forgot to RSVP. Still, I offered to host the bachelorette brunch at my place even though I knew it would be declined. But none of it stopped the final blow, delivered via a 3-line text 2 weeks before the ceremony. We're going for a curated aesthetic. The venue is tight. Don't feel pressured to come. And just like that, I was removed. Not uninvited, because that would require first being considered. I was just softly erased. I read the message twice. 3 times. Then again the next morning. I didn't reply. I couldn't even decide whether to be angry or humiliated. I thought about the time she cried in my arms after her first breakup, the nights we stayed up swapping stories, the childhood Christmas when I gave her my favorite bracelet even though she'd lost hers. Maybe that was the point. That version of us, the one where I mattered, had quietly expired the moment she decided to build a life filtered to perfection. And apparently, there was no room in that life for anyone who shopped off-season or wore her hair in ponytails. I didn't say anything to my parents. I didn't mention it to my friends. I told myself I was above it, but I found myself scrolling through the venue's tagged photos on Instagram, memorizing every angle of the estate she chose. White columns, string lights, a lake that shimmered unnaturally in every shot. The comments were filled with heart emojis and dream-come-true captions. I stared at them like they were written in another language, one I was never taught. For days, I tried to distract myself with work, laundry, errands. But everything I touched felt hollow, like I was doing tasks inside someone else's life. The thing about being seen as basic is that people expect you to disappear quietly. They think you'll nod and say, okay, and go back to knitting socks in a beige room somewhere. And maybe I would have. Maybe that would have been the end of it if I hadn't overheard her on a call with her stylist. It was purely by accident. I'd gone to drop off a charger she left at my place. She wasn't home, but her phone was on speaker. She must have answered via smartwatch or something. And what I heard twisted something in me. She laughed and said she just couldn't risk the aesthetic being ruined by that kind of energy. She said I was sweet but too forgettable. She's not a bad person, she added. She's just so very, very Target. Like the store. Like a brand of mass appeal and no distinction. Then she laughed again. And that's when I knew. It wasn't just that she didn't want me there. She didn't want anyone to know I existed. In her world of handmade name cards and champagne towers, I was a glitch. A thread she didn't want unraveling the fabric. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my tiny kitchen table, half lit by the glow of the fridge, and thought about every time I'd made myself smaller for someone else's comfort. Every time I'd given the last bite, the last word, the benefit of the doubt. Every time I had dimmed down, so someone else could shine. I thought about all the versions of me she had used, praised, pitted, then discarded like expired trends. And I realized I had done nothing to stop it. I had always been the easy sister, the supportive one, the one who blended in like wallpaper.
But what if I didn't blend in this time?
What if, just once, I arrived too loudly to be ignored? I spent the next 3 days planning. Not plotting revenge. Not exactly. It wasn't about ruining her wedding or stealing the spotlight. It was about presence. About making sure that the version of me she had scrubbed from her life showed up, visible, undeniable. I made one call to my coworker, who owed me a favor, a man with a knack for show-stopping entrances. He didn't ask questions. He just asked what color the limo should be. White, I said. Obnoxiously white. the kind that gleams under any kind of lighting. I found a dress that didn't whisper, one that sang. Not sequins, but sleek satin and emerald green, a color that didn't just pop, it punched. I booked a stylist for the day and told her I needed old Hollywood meets modern confidence. She smiled like she understood exactly what I meant. When I looked in the mirror the morning of the wedding, I barely recognized myself. Not because I looked different, but because for the first time in years, I looked like someone who didn't need to apologize for being there. The drive to the venue took 45 minutes. The limo turned heads the second it pulled up, purring like something imported. The doorman hesitated when I stepped out, eyes flickering with the same uncertainty I saw in myself for years. But I smiled, nodded, and walked past him like I belonged.
And in that moment I did.
The lawn was already dotted with guests sipping cocktails and complimenting each other's linen blends. No one noticed me at first. Not until I reached the edge of the reception tent. I could feel the hush ripple before I heard it. A few heads turned. Then a few more. Someone dropped a fork. And then I saw her, my sister, standing beneath a trellis of imported orchids, her smile frozen halfway. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. I thought she might scream, or cry, or have security escort me out. But she didn't. She just blinked slowly, as if trying to determine whether I was real or a trick of the light. I nodded once, not smiling, not angry, just existing. And for the first time, that was enough. No one said anything to me directly. They didn't have to. I could feel the tension curve around me, like a glass dome. Whispers floated. Cameras lowered. A few curious cousins glanced between us like waiting for a spark to ignite the whole thing. But I wasn't there to fight. I was there to be. I found an empty table near the back and took my seat. The fabric of my dress shimmered in the late afternoon light. A server walked by and hesitated, then offered me champagne. I took it, sipped it slowly. If she wanted me to look out of place, she'd have to try harder. Because every move I made now had purpose. Controlled, refined, sharp. As dinner was served, I noticed subtle changes in the air. Conversations that had flowed freely moments ago began to stutter. My presence was a fracture in the facade. And she knew it. She knew that every time someone asked, "Who's that?" someone else would have to answer. She couldn't erase me in real time. Not without drawing more attention to herself. So she did what she always did. She pretended. Pretended not to see me. Pretended I wasn't seated under a chandelier she had custom-picked. Pretended my chair didn't match hers. But pretending only works when no one else is watching. And this time everyone was. I didn't try to approach her. I didn't try to make a scene. I simply lifted my glass in her direction and held her gaze for one long, uninterrupted moment. The toast came later, but that was the real speech. And still, the night was just beginning. Because what I didn't know then, what none of us knew yet, was that the cracks in her perfect day were only just starting to show. The music shifted to something slower, the kind of soft, ambient notes that glide under a conversation and pretend not to exist. Guests swirled across the dance floor in pairs, camera phones flickered, laughter hovered just high enough to seem genuine. But beneath it all, a current moved, one I had created just by being here. And though my sister hadn't spoken a word to me yet, her entire posture had changed. Her head tilted more sharply, her smile seemed harder, and she gripped her bouquet, like it might float away if she didn't hold tight enough. I watched her from the corner of my eye as she posed for photos beside her groom, perfect in posture, but vacant in expression. Her eyes, however, kept darting toward me. She was unraveling and trying to thread herself back together in front of 100 witnesses. And then came the first unexpected moment. A woman in a cobalt jumpsuit, someone I recognized vaguely from childhood, an aunt or distant cousin, glided over to my table with a glass of red wine in one hand and a smirk in the other. She leaned down like she was whispering a secret, but said it just loudly enough for the nearby table to hear. "I always thought she was scared of you." I blinked, unsure how to respond. "Not scared," she continued, "but afraid you'd make her look small if people ever looked close enough." Then she stood back up and melted into the crowd. I didn't even know her name. But her words sat beside me for the rest of the evening like an uninvited guest. I had been so focused on surviving the night, I hadn't considered that maybe my presence would awaken something in other people too. The stories started to trickle in. Whispers during appetizer breaks, sideways glances paired with polite nods, quiet questions like puzzle pieces falling into my lap. Someone mentioned that I'd helped pay off my sister's deposit when she got cold feet last year and considered pushing the wedding back. Another remembered how I'd taken care of our grandmother for 3 weeks so my sister could go dress shopping uninterrupted. These weren't secrets, but they were inconvenient truths, ones she had carefully buried under hashtags and vision boards. And now, here I was, a breathing contradiction to her carefully curated version of reality. Halfway through the reception, just as the cake was being wheeled out, the first real crack in her perfect image came. A child, no older than 7, ran past the cake table and clipped the corner of the stand. The top tier wobbled, swayed, and then tipped straight onto the floor. The silence was immediate, jagged. The groom's face paled. A collective gasp spread like wildfire. My sister turned so sharply, she nearly tripped over her own gown. She looked ready to implode. And just when the murmurs started again, I stood up.
Calmly.
Walked over, grabbed a napkin, and began cleaning the mess. People stared. A few joined in. One of the venue staff thanked me quietly. But the real moment happened after, when my sister's voice cracked through the tension like a dropped glass. "Don't touch it," she snapped, eyes wide, jaw trembling. "You've done enough already." Everyone heard it. That brittle anger. That edge of panic trying to mask itself as control. And just like that, the spell she had over the room began to fray. I looked up slowly. Not furious. Not humiliated. Just steady. And instead of arguing, I smiled, tired but intact, and returned to my seat. For the rest of the night, she avoided my eyes. But others didn't. A second twist came later, when a group of her husband's relatives asked to take a photo with me. I didn't understand it at first. Why me? I wasn't in the bridal party, not part of the theme. But as one of them explained, her voice dipped low with mischief, "We heard about what you did for her. Before all this. You're the real reason this day happened, aren't you?" I laughed softly, but the feeling didn't warm. Instead, it stung. I had been the scaffolding, and now I wasn't even allowed on the balcony. As the reception wound down and people began loosening their collars, changing their shoes, taking selfies with the floral wall, I walked outside to get air. The night was cooler than I expected, but clean, quiet. I stood by the same limo that brought me here and traced the edge of the window with my finger. Part of me considered leaving early, disappearing before the final song, before the hugs, before the inevitable confrontation. But something kept me rooted. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was justice. Or maybe I just needed to see how this all played out. And then came the moment I didn't expect, the one that twisted the night into something sharper. She found me outside. I heard the door close, the soft echo of heels on stone. I didn't turn immediately. I thought she might tell me to leave. Or scream.
Or cry.
But instead, she just stood there, a silhouette against the backdrop of the venue lights. For a long beat, we didn't say anything. Then she said something so absurd, it actually made me laugh under my breath. "You weren't supposed to look better than me." It wasn't a joke. Her voice was tight. Unstable, honest. And I realized this wasn't about the wedding. It had never been. It was about control, about image, about how she needed to be the center of every room, even if she didn't know how to hold it. And I was the mirror she couldn't edit.
She talked for a while.
Rambling, accusatory, then pleading. Somewhere in the middle, she said she wished I had just stayed in my lane. That she had finally made something beautiful, and I came just to remind her of what she owed. I let her talk, let her spin. Then I asked the only question that mattered. What did I actually do wrong? And when she didn't answer, when her mouth opened but no sound came out, I nodded and stepped into the limo. Inside, I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just sat with the quiet. But the real twist came not from her, but from what happened after. Because someone else had been watching that entire scene, her new mother-in-law. I hadn't noticed her at first, but as the limo pulled away, I saw her standing near the garden arch, arms folded, expression unreadable. And 3 days later, she messaged me. A short, direct message. Meet me for lunch. There are things I think you deserve to know. What she shared unraveled a truth that reshaped everything. She told me that my sister had been painting me as the unstable one for months. That she had told their side of the family I was prone to outbursts, overly emotional, manipulative. That they had debated whether to hire security just in case I made a scene. She shared screenshots.
Proof.
Lies carefully planted in conversations, warped stories twisted just enough to justify my exclusion. And in that moment, I understood. This wasn't a miscommunication. This wasn't about mismatched aesthetics or limited seating. This was sabotage. Preemptive reputation control. And I wasn't supposed to know. But I did. Now I did. And that's when I decided that showing up in a limo wasn't my revenge. It was just the opening scene. The restaurant was tucked between a florist and a dry cleaner, the kind of quiet spot you wouldn't notice unless you were looking for it. I arrived 10 minutes early, my stomach a tight coil of questions. Her new mother-in-law was already there, seated by the window with a lemon wedge perched untouched on her water glass. She wore dark glasses despite the cloudy day, and when she removed them, her eyes met mine with the kind of expression that says I'm not here to play.
She didn't waste time.
She pulled a folder from her purse, slid it across the table, and said, "You're going to want to read that before you say anything." Inside were printouts of messages, texts, emails, even group chats where my sister had painted me into a caricature. There were phrases I would never use, stories I didn't recognize, and accusations that curled my lip in disbelief. She told people I ruined our family Thanksgiving last year by making a scene about not being acknowledged. She claimed I had mental health episodes and once sent her threatening messages late at night. But the timestamps were wrong, and the messages she claimed I sent, I had proof I hadn't. Receipts. Screenshots. Even emails from that time where I was sending her money for decorations she said she couldn't afford. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was stunned, because it was one thing to be excluded. It was another to be erased and rewritten. Her mother-in-law, Diane, waited quietly. When I finally looked up, she said, "I thought she was overwhelmed. But after Saturday, after seeing how you handled yourself, I needed to understand what was real." She took a long sip of her water and added, "And I don't think the person she described was you." For a moment, I wanted to thank her, but the words sat stiff in my throat. I didn't know how to feel gratitude for someone uncovering a lie that had never needed to exist in the first place. So I just nodded, folding the papers back together like a wound I wasn't ready to expose. What followed over the next few days felt like pulling thread from a sweater. The more I tugged, the more unraveled. Friends who hadn't spoken to me in months started reaching out with cautious apologies. A cousin admitted she believed I had chosen not to attend the wedding, that I ghosted the family out of jealousy. A mutual friend confessed that my sister had warned her I might try to crash the wedding and embarrass everyone. It was almost funny, except it wasn't. I hadn't just been removed from the guest list. I'd been rewritten into a villain in a narrative I never agreed to be in. The final crack came when my parents called. My father sounded small, a tone I hadn't heard since I was a child, and he forgot to pick me up from a school play. He said he wished he had asked more questions. My mother, quiet at first, eventually admitted she'd felt something was wrong but didn't want to stir conflict. "She's always been the dramatic one," my mother said, as if that excused the rest. But it didn't. And I told her that. I didn't scream or beg or try to win her over. I just said, "Silence isn't neutral. It takes a side." Then I hung up. Not out of anger, but because I had no energy left to hold up conversations that always ended with me being told to understand everyone else while no one tried to understand me. That week, I stopped by my storage unit. In the very back was a box I hadn't opened in years. Inside were birthday cards, childhood photos, letters my sister and I had written each other during summer camps. There was one where she promised she'd name her first child after me. I held that letter for a long time, not because I believed her anymore, but because part of me still remembered the girl who wrote it. And that's what hurt most. She didn't disappear. She changed.
Slowly. Strategically.
And I hadn't noticed until the kindness was a costume, until the gratitude became transaction, until I was useful, and then I wasn't. I thought that was the end of it, that I'd collect myself, retreat, and maybe rebuild somewhere new. But life, it seems, wasn't done revealing her yet. One evening, Diane texted me again. Just one sentence. You need to see this. She sent a link to a wedding recap video, one of those beautifully edited highlight reels with drone footage and slow-motion smiles. I almost didn't watch it, but something told me I should. Halfway through, there was a section showing the bridal party getting ready. Laughter, mimosas, hairpins being tucked into flawless buns. Then came a short clip of the groom's sister saying, "I'm just so glad everything worked out after that whole drama with the crazy sister." The camera cut away quickly, but the implication was loud. It didn't name me, but it didn't need to. I stared at the screen for a long time, then refreshed the video. The views were climbing fast. It had been shared by the venue's page, tagged with hashtag McAllisterMagic and hashtag Wedding of the Season.
Hundreds of likes.
Comments flooded in. Beautiful bride. Perfect day. Goals. But under that perfect gloss, I saw the cracks. I saw how much had been built on a foundation of fiction. And suddenly, I wasn't sad anymore. I was steady. Because there was one last twist I hadn't played yet. I called a contact, a friend from university who ran a blog. A respected one. She had always asked me to write something, anything, whenever I felt ready. And now I didn't use names. I didn't need to. I wrote about family erasure, about soft exclusion disguised as aesthetics, about being rewritten into someone else's villain for the sake of optics. I shared my story with grace, with receipts, with clarity. I didn't send the link to anyone. I didn't tag my sister. I just let it live. It went viral in 2 days. The comments were unlike anything I expected. Thousands of people related. People who had been cast out of families for being too quiet, too odd, too honest, too poor. People who had carried entire households and then been ghosted the second they stopped offering help. And as the story gained momentum, her wedding video became awkwardly famous for all the wrong reasons. People connected the dots. Screenshots surfaced. A few of her vendors quietly removed tags, not wanting to be caught in the backlash. But even then, I didn't gloat. Instead, I sat in my small living room, curled up on a secondhand couch, and watched the quiet unfold. The real consequence wasn't humiliation. It was exposure. Because people like my sister thrive in shadows, behind filters and curated truths. But once the light floods in, the performance dies. 3 weeks after the article blew up, I received a letter in the mail. Handwritten. No return address. Just my name in ink. Inside was a single line. "You could have destroyed me." It wasn't signed, but I knew the handwriting. I folded it carefully and placed it in the box with the childhood letters. Then I picked up my pen and started writing again. Because the story wasn't over. Not yet. The silence after the letter wasn't peaceful. It pulsed. It felt like waiting in a hallway where all the doors were shut and locked, like something was coming and I couldn't predict the shape of it. I didn't reply to the note because there was no return address, and even if there had been, I didn't owe her a response. She was right about one thing, though. I could have destroyed her. But I didn't. I simply told the truth. And for people like her, truth is the sharpest weapon of all. The days that followed were eerily quiet. No texts from her. No cryptic social media posts. No calls from my parents. But then I started noticing smaller things. A shared bank account I once helped her set up had a name change notification. My name was quietly removed from the mailing list of the nonprofit we once co-donated to. She was pruning me from the narrative again, but this time not because I was basic, but because I was powerful. Because people had seen me now, not as the invisible sister, not as the background character in her story, but as the main character of my own. And then, just when I thought the last twist had passed, I received an unexpected email. Not from her or anyone I knew. It came from a local events planner, someone tied to the wedding industry. They'd read my article. They wanted to talk. Not about the wedding, she said, but about something bigger. I met her for coffee in a bright little cafe downtown. She was younger than I expected, dressed like she walked out of a mood board, but her eyes were sharp and her tone was business. She wanted to launch a speaking series, a panel discussion themed around modern family dynamics, curated perfection, and the pressure to perform, especially as women. And she wanted me to speak. Not just write, not behind a screen, in front of an audience. I almost said no. My chest tightened at the thought. The girl who had been called basic, forgettable, who had been scrubbed from a wedding guest list because she didn't fit the theme, how was she supposed to hold a mic? But something inside me, something new and quiet and strong, whispered, "Do it." So I said yes. The night of the event, I stood behind the curtain in a borrowed dress and watched the crowd gather. It wasn't thousands of people, maybe 100 at most, but they had come with notebooks, with open hearts, with pain tucked behind their smiles. They were here to listen. And when I walked onto that stage, I felt it every quiet moment in my past, every time I had been dismissed or overlooked or rewritten, shifted like dust in my chest and cleared the space for something new. I didn't tell my sister I was doing it. I didn't tell anyone from my family. But somehow, someone told her anyway. Because 2 nights after the talk, my phone rang. I recognized the number. I let it ring once.
Twice.
Then I picked up. Her voice was hollow, tired. Not performative this time. Just defeated. She said she didn't know how things got this far. That she didn't expect it to blow up. That she didn't mean for it to get ugly. And I let her speak. I let her wrap her explanations in bows made of guilt and gaslight. And when she finally asked if we could start fresh, I paused. I thought about everything I wanted to say, but I didn't say any of it. Instead, I asked her a question I knew she wasn't expecting. "What are you actually sorry for?" She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "For underestimating you." That was the only honest thing she said. I didn't accept the apology. I didn't reject it either. I just said I hoped she learned something. And then I ended the call. Weeks passed. The wedding faded from headlines and hashtags. The article found a home in the personal essay sections of a few publications. The panel series expanded, 3 more dates added, this time with a sponsorship. And one quiet Sunday, I received a message that curled the edges of the chapter just a bit more. It was from one of her bridesmaids. She had always smiled too hard in photos and never really talked to me. But now she sent a long, hesitant paragraph. She said she wanted me to know that not all of them agreed with how I'd been treated. That the group chat after the wedding had been a mess. That several people had left quietly after the video went live. "We thought we were doing the right thing," she wrote. "But silence doesn't make you innocent. It just makes you quieter than the problem." I didn't reply right away. I didn't need to. Her words weren't for redemption. They were an echo. A quiet yes to everything I had felt. And that's when I knew. I didn't need to end the story with revenge or closure or a final confrontation. I didn't need to win. I just needed to exist on my terms, visibly, wholly, without begging for a seat at a table I helped build. But life, of course, had one final twist for me. It came in a small envelope, cream-colored, thick paper. No return address again. Just one line inside. "You were never basic. You were just too real for me to handle." This time it was signed. Her name. In ink. Not typed. No filters. No sarcasm. And strangely, I didn't feel victorious. I felt released. Like finally, she had looked at me, not through the lens of comparison, or convenience, or curated perfection, but as someone full and flawed and real. Someone she couldn't decorate. Someone she couldn't delete. I placed the letter in the same box that held the old summer camp note, the birthday cards, and the apology she never gave me after college. It was a box of beginnings, endings, and everything in between. And then I locked it, Not to forget, but to remember clearly. Because this story wasn't about one wedding or one sister or one limo. It was about the slow, quiet war so many of us fight to be seen, not as props in someone else's highlight reel, but as the whole, unedited story. And for the first time in my life, I had told mine. Winter came earlier than usual that year. The trees outside my apartment shed their leaves in a matter of days, as if even nature was eager to start over. I found myself watching them more often, lingering by the window with a blanket draped over my shoulders and tea growing cold in my hand. There was a stillness in my home I hadn't felt in years. Not silence, but stillness, the kind that hums with clarity. It didn't mean I had no pain. It meant the pain wasn't in control anymore. After everything, I didn't go back to the way things were. I didn't text my sister daily. I didn't slide into group chats with half-jokes and fake ease. I didn't reinsert myself into a space I had been trimmed out of. Instead, I built something new. My writing took off, small pieces at first, guest posts, essays, podcast segments. People started to recognize me not for the scandal, not as the sister from the wedding, but for what I had to say, for the questions I was asking, for the story behind the story. But stories, real ones, rarely end without one more shadow slipping through the cracks. The next twist came quietly, through an envelope that looked almost identical to the others. Only this one wasn't handwritten. It was printed. Crisp. Clinical. A legal notice. I blinked at the heading. A letter of intent. Not a lawsuit, but a warning. My sister's new husband had filed to protect their shared public image and claimed that future public writings might be considered defamatory. I had used no names, no photos, but it didn't matter. They were scared, not because I had lied, but because I hadn't. At first, I felt panic. My hands went cold. My chest tightened. All over again, I was back in that place where I questioned myself, where I wondered if I had gone too far, if I had been too loud, too honest. But the difference now was simple. I wasn't alone. My inbox was full of voices. Women.
Men.
Siblings. Cousins. People who had read my story and felt like someone had finally written theirs. A lawyer I'd never met offered to review the documents pro bono. A woman from a publishing house asked if I'd consider turning the piece into a book. One of the panel sponsors reached out and said, if they're trying to silence you, it means you hit a nerve. So I took a breath. I wrote my reply. I said no names were ever used. I reminded them that truth is not defamation. I let my lawyer friend draft the actual response, but I read it word by word. And at the bottom, I added one line in my own handwriting. You cannot trademark a lie and call it reputation. They didn't follow through. The silence that followed wasn't angry. It was embarrassed. I thought that was the end. But endings, I've learned, don't come in a single letter or phone call or moment. They arrive like dusk.
Slow.
Layered. Some parts still lit. Others already gone. I was in the grocery store one afternoon, wandering the spice aisle, when I heard a familiar voice.
Joy.
My cousin's daughter. The one I used to help with homework, who wore a matching bracelet with mine until it unraveled. She was older now, maybe 15, taller than I remembered, her hair braided and her hands tucked into a puffer jacket. She saw me before I saw her. She didn't say anything right away, just walked over and stood beside me, staring at the jars of cinnamon like they held secrets. And then she said, I read your story. I turned to her slowly. Her face was calm, but her eyes were heavy. I didn't know it was real, she added. They always said you left, that you didn't care anymore. I nodded. My throat was tight. I hadn't expected to cry in the spice aisle. I still have the bracelet, she said. It broke, but I kept it. And then she did something I hadn't expected. She hugged me. Just one squeeze, quick and tight, like sealing a letter before the wind could tear it open. After that, the days moved easier. I set new boundaries. I blocked numbers when I needed to. I stopped checking her social media. I stopped wondering if people still whispered about that limo, or that dress, or that day. Because the truth is, even if they remembered it, They didn't control the meaning of it. I did. And for my final twist, the quietest one, I did something I'd always been too hesitant to do. I started writing fiction. Not essays. Not retellings. Not trauma in polished paragraphs. But stories. Whole worlds. Ones where the overlooked sister was the hero. Where she didn't need a dramatic comeback or a limo or a viral blog post to be seen. She just was.
Loved.
Complicated. Necessary. I got published. A small press picked up my manuscript. Nothing flashy. But enough to place my name on a cover in a bookstore. Enough to make it real. On launch day, I didn't throw a party. I didn't invite my family. I went alone to the bookstore and bought a copy with my own money. I took it home, placed it on my shelf between the cookbooks and the poetry collections. Then I lit a candle, brewed tea, and set 2 plates at my small kitchen table. Not for show, just for truth. And when I sat down, I knew something I had never been certain of before. I was never basic. I was never forgettable. I was just too honest for people who needed their lies to stay pretty. And now I wasn't telling their story anymore. I was telling mine. And this time no one could crop me out.
The end.